Well, hello everyone. This is Data-Driven Formula One, and we are Ganna, Pogrebna, and Patrick Henz, and we continue talking. Hi, Patrick, and we continue talking about Formula One and analytics. And today we're going to talk about 1953.
Yes, so we are traveling further in time, and finally we arrived in the year 1953.
Yeah, so 1953 season. So 1952, as we said before, was a very special season when we had Alfa Romeo dropping out due to budget constraints, and Ferrari kind of becoming the leading driving force of the championship. So I guess that continued in 1953, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The 53 season was practically a continuation of 52. Again, we drove under the Formula 2 regulations. And as you already can see on this slide, Ferrari continued. No surprise, Alberto Ascari became the champion. We will see later a little bit. It's nevertheless, if you see Ferrari, etc., the team not dominated the season like the year before, but Maserati became quite close. And we may discuss one of the reasons was not only the development of the car, but Juan Manuel Fangio returned, and this time for Maserati. And I think he, as a driver and a person, also supported the technical advantage at the team.
Yeah, just want to remind everybody that in 1952, if you recall, Fangio was kind of contemplating joining the British team. But yeah, they even in 1953 they didn't put in a car. And yeah, so he got an offer from Maserati and ultimately became, one of the drivers for Maserati. So that's what happened. And yeah, and another, I guess, important point here is that we actually do have a British driver in the stable, and that's Mike Hawthorne. And he was driving for Ferrari for several years, and yeah, this was also a year when he won the French Grand Prix, and the French Grand Prix, we will talk about it. It was a very special race, and
Exactly.
yeah. So the cool thing is that it was not just one person dominating everything, but yeah, it was a number of people driving for Ferrari.
Correct. Even if Alberto Ascari won most of the races, he was not the sole dominator, but really we had a lot of racing in this season. And we may shortly touch the different races. Unfortunately, and this is something which we already discussed quite in the beginning of our podcast, of our YouTube series, is the Argentinian Grand Prix. And with this, let's say, really for first time, Formula One became international. I mean, Indianapolis always had been on the agenda, but in opposite just to last year, where Ferrari tried to participate, the other teams never traveled to the US, and now everybody is overseas in Argentina. And this Grand Prix was heavily supported by the Argentinian government, especially President Juan Perón. Mm-hmm. Outside Argentina, maybe most famous because of his wife Evita. Similar to many other authoritarian rulers, he understood motorsport as a way to promote his government and also the efficiency of his government. Something which we will not mention in this podcast. Besides Argentina, we had Also the famous Panamericana, the race organized by the Mexican government, where they wanted to promote Mexico as an important market, and also Ferrari, Maserati, etc. wanted to market their cars there. We had the same drivers as in Formula One, but we had no Formula One cars, but sports cars, so that's why we not mention the Panamericana here from 1950 to 54. So back to the race. As I said, it was promoted by Perón, and to ensure maximal attendance, the entrance had been for free. So we had many people here, and unfortunately, what we discussed also earlier in one of the episodes, it became to a very tragical accident where Giuseppe Farina lost the control of his car and drove into a crowd of people, which killed 13 of the spectators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we discussed before, he basically got into the driving seat in the next race. Despite this, so tragic accident, which kind of also talks about the strength of the character.
Yep.
And because I imagine that was pretty shocking event. Yes. For a driver, it's very difficult, I guess, to bounce back. But so that's basically what happened. Yeah, actually, like just to maybe finish the sad part about 1953 there, we can also mention probably here that two drivers lost their lives as well during this season. One was Chet Miller, and that's the American driver who actually died in Indianapolis during practice. And then another one was Charles de Tomaco, who was a Belgian driver, and he also was, he died again in practice, but that was in Modena Grand Prix, which is kind of like on the practice circuit that happened. And like I said before, if we take the actual races, like throughout the history of the sport, there are kind of, I think about 50 drivers who lost their lives, but many of them died in practice or during the testing of the cars and all that. So I guess we could probably make one of the episodes about the fatalities and kind of the causes of the fatalities. And most of the time it was kind of a very similar situation as this one. So it was someone not kind of being able to negotiate the corner. There were not so many fatal collisions between cars, but it was mostly, a combination of mechanical fault and human error. But I guess it would be interesting to have a look, like analytically have a look at all these cases and talk about them in one of the episodes.
Exactly. I mean, if we have 70 years of racing, 50 fatalities means a little bit less than one a year, but nevertheless, I assume the statistic would show that in the first half of Formula One, it was maybe like 2 a year, while the last years, luckily, due to safety, safety of the car itself, the driver equipment, and of course also the design of the tracks, it has been luckily much less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, I think, more than 50 overall, but like I said, during the Grand Prix themselves, it was about 50. But then, in testing, there were more people. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, in early years, we would say that many more people died driving in various competitions, but mostly practices and testing. And but I mean, as we go along, like, we will explain how FIA regulations changed. And like one of the major goals of FIA regulations is actually to address safety. And, we will see this throughout this the series. Yeah, as you can see, like on the screen now on the slide, we have Fangio and Gonzalez, so two Argentinian drivers before the Argentinian race, and you can see like we already addressed that in previous conversations, but you can see what they're wearing, right? So they're just wearing t-shirts. They have slightly better kind of headwear than in previous years, but I mean it's not much protection when you're going at these speeds. And you know, like the top of the car is completely open as well, so you know, anything like even if you have a collision in front of you or an accident in front of you, that just any piece of debris can also cause a lot of damage. So, you know, you just have basically this goggles and, you know, helmet. And the helmet looks a little bit better than previous years, but that's it. Like you don't have anything else in terms of protection.
Exactly. And when we do such a special issue, maybe it will be interesting to align this also with the development in safety in general, like safety in factories. I would assume we would see similar statistics that the fatal accidents in factories are going down the last 70 years. This particularly safety become a much more important topic, not only in racing, but in society in general.
Yeah, luckily for us, Patrick is an expert in compliance, so he can tell us how kind of reckless behavior can lead to awful things. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be very important to discuss this because, you know, especially as we go along and as we are going to talk about some really charismatic drivers who lost their lives in sports. So, yeah. So, but now kind of moving swiftly on to Indianapolis 500, again, we see that it was heavily dominated by American cars, and yeah, Curtis again emerged as a winner here, and yeah. As mentioned on the slide there, you know, it was a little bit extreme that year because it was very, very hot. And yeah, as you can imagine, again, in those types of cars, you're not protected from the heat. But interestingly, the two drivers that ended up in place 1 and 2 actually were driving their cars throughout the entire race, whereas others kind of used relief drivers to have some rest, you know, from driving.
And that's an interesting point, and we may discuss this later over the episode, as we may assume that in 1953 fitness was not such a dominant topic in Formula One racing than it is today. Maybe we can say that at the end of the 70s, Niki Lauda was the first driver who really concentrated on his fitness after the accident, and with this started this new modern driver who not only comes to the weekend but has his training plan all over the week, is regularly being in the gym, etc. And I mean, you can see it directly here on our photo from Fangio, and maybe especially Fräulein Gonzalez. They not really look if they would be spending 5 hours a day in the gym every day. So fitness was not on the same level as we see since the end of the 1970s.
Yeah, but at the same time, like you mentioned before, Patrick, when we talked about previous years, I mean, these guys, like if you have ever seen this kind of early car, early Formula One car, you also understand that, you know, so weight is extremely important to be fast. Yes. And so all these guys, despite not kind of being quite chubby sometimes, they were also quite short, and, you know, they basically, you know, you needed to fit inside the car, and also to be kind of more or less comfortably sitting inside there. So they tended to be quite light, despite the kind of the physicality of kind of not being athletes or very sporty people. They were nevertheless quite light and also quite short, right? So you couldn't like fit a tall person there. Yeah.
Exactly, and this is not only a development in car racing. I mean, if you would see today a soccer match from the early 1970s or 60s, I mean, it's a quite slow game in opposite to today, where football, soccer became very athletic and much faster than 30 years ago. So it's a general development in sports and society in general.
Yeah, and I guess also another thing to remember is, I mean, we will come back to this when we discuss Silverstone. I mean, these events were not televised, so there were not celebrities. I mean, they became celebrities eventually, but I mean, they were not celebrities when it all started. So it was a popular sport, but it was just followed by limited number, let's just say limited number of fans. Although there was a lot of interest, of course, in many countries, it was not like millions of people across the globe were watching every race. So you could only go to the race if you were physically there. And that also contributed to the culture, I guess. So it's not like
exactly.
There's no.
Mm-hmm. And you see this accelerating this development now. Not only that races are in TV, but most of today's Formula One drivers have their Twitter account. They are on Instagram, so they're practically sending photos each day to their followers. So
yeah, they are on TV. I mean, the large proportion of Formula One driver income is from advertisement. So therefore, obviously, you want to look good, and exactly. You're in all sorts of magazines, and not only motorsport magazines. So yeah, I mean, but this culture, this celebrity culture, we haven't seen for many years. I mean, we actually will. As we go along, we will identify the time period when this happened, when this change happened from kind of just being motorsport enthusiasts. The drivers became really, charismatic stars. But at that time, yeah, it was basically just people who wanted to drive cars at fast speeds. That's who they were.
Exactly. So let's carry on. The next track is Belgium, the famous Spa-Francorchamps. Luckily, I lived quite near, so this is really a very fascinating racetrack inside the Belgian mountains, going up, going down, fast curves. So really a course which demands the highest quality of the car, but really also demands the driver. So really a great track, and I think not today anymore, but maybe 10 years ago, it was a part of the normal Belgium streets. So outside the Grand Prix and other races, you can drove there with your normal cars. And really, even going up there on the curves with your normal car, normal speed, it's really impressive.
Yeah, another point to mention about Belgium Grand Prix is that the weather is almost always bad. On rare years we have kind of nice dry conditions, but most of the time you have either wet conditions or kind of rainy conditions. And as we know, that's what also makes racing interesting, because all of a sudden everyone has, well, if not equal chances, but pretty good chance to win if you are a skillful driver. So like skill becomes a lot more important than kind of team effort to make a good car. So Belgium is always an exciting race. And then we had a really cool race in Reims, or Remy, as French people say it. it's it basically was called the race of the century, right, Patrick?
Yep. And I mean, we saw in this race what we often unfortunately missing, especially in the last seasons. We had real racing, changing of positions. And what we shortly mentioned in the beginning is we had this duel between Mike Hortons from UK on Ferrari against Fancho on Maserati. So we see Maserati became quite close and made Ferrari this season a little bit more difficult to win. In fact, much more difficult to win than the 52 season, where they practically had no competition at all.
Yeah, and finally, for those of you who are fans of British motor racing, here we have the first British driver who actually won a Grand Prix within the time period that we are talking about, from 1950 kind of onwards. And yeah, this was Mike Houghton, whom you see on your screen. Yeah, the very special Grand Prix, Silverstone, in 1953, and this is an actual picture from the race that we obtained from Alamy, and the cool thing about this race was that it was the first televised race. So it says that it was televised live, but I just want to make sure we all understand that races were never captured. I mean, if you imagine something like today's capture of the race, it was nothing like it. Yeah, it was televised live, but it was mostly highlights that were televised either by, for the British fans, it was either BBC or ITV. And these highlights were shown all the way through until 1979. So in 1950s and 1960s, it's not like you would see the entire race. So it was, indeed, it was kind of shown, but it was not the whole detailed race analytics and everything that you can see on the screen. So so again, we will, Patrick and I will do, I think we need to do a separate a separate episode on just broadcasting and analytics in broadcasting. Is very, very interesting how, for example, Sky does analytics on their programs, and BBC does analytics on their programs, and it's really fascinating because you can do a lot of cool big data analytics live as the program, the live broadcast is developing. And it's really cool thing to see. I mean, because you could really see how the audience changes as you kind of move from one host of the show to another, and all that. So we will talk about this at one point. But yeah, this was the first race that was televised, and it makes it special. So, and it was the British race in Silverstone, and you can see the actual photo from that race on your screens now.
Yes, and I mean, and even in the UK, we see how near the spectators have been to the race. So you imagine anybody who would lose the control of the car and crash against the tribune, there would be automatically 10, 20 people dying. So it was not only in Argentina, where you may thought we are not in Europe, and so they would not have been on the same standard as Silverstone, but we see it also in Silverstone. There was nearly no distance between the race car and the spectator. So very dangerous, not only for drivers, but really also for the spectators.
Yes, indeed, and you can see for those of you who lived in the UK, like I lived in the UK for 10 years, and you understand the traditional British queue. So people kind of are lining up very neatly normally, but here you can see that some people actually standing kind of quite far away from this boundary that was set up. So yeah, and very close to the cars, and indeed on the grass or somewhere on the ground, very close to the race. And yeah, luckily in Silverstone there are kind of you are kind of going to be in certain sector normally, and the sectors existed back then already, but yeah, they were not as well structured as they are now.
Exactly, and yeah, I mean, they're not only adults. I mean, the parents went there, especially the father with their sons to see. So they even brought their little children and brought them in such a dangerous situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we see the winner of the season there, Alberto Ascari, and yeah, this is Nürburgring race, where we really saw this rivalry from Maserati and the competition between Ferrari and Maserati in this race was like really pronounced, yeah, at this stage it was already obvious that Ascari would win the championship. Yeah, he was unbeatable. Ferrari overall, like we showed you at the beginning, won 7 races out of 9 that season, right? Is that correct? It was 9, I think. And one of them was in the US, so that doesn't really count because, yeah, still we have a situation when European teams were not competitive overseas.
Exactly, and for Germany, we are here at the famous Nürburgring, which is also called the Green Hells. So I guess the most difficult race, I don't know what was the lap time in 1953, but must be something about 10, 11 minutes, I would assume. So a very long racetrack, and for most of the drivers, it's impossible to really remember all the curves, where to brake, etc. And that's made it a very dangerous racetrack. And also, we are quite near to Spa-Francorchamps. We are here in the Eifel, the German mountains. So the weather are completely non-predictable. You can have in summer snow. So even more than Spa-Francorchamps, the weather is completely unpredictable.
Yeah, yeah. I think so Patrick and I, we agreed that we are going to also talk about circuits at one point, and yeah, at that time we will. I do have the data on speeds and laps, so we can actually figure out how long it took and how, and kind of in progression, how long it was taken to do one lap. And yeah, so we could also look at data with regard to who achieved the fastest lap and what was the speed at each year. So that is definitely something that we're going to do when we talk about circuits.
Yes, and one specialty, just to add, is that as it's so long, there's no, there in one part you may have rain, at one sun, so it was practically not possible to have to choose the right tires, which works under all conditions, so which make it even more complicated for the drivers.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where kind of pitting the car became like really important and strategically important, and you needed to understand what exactly you need before the race and when you are going to change it approximately. So you need to be very you need to be very, very precise with that. Yeah, Switzerland, another really interesting race. And yeah, so again we had very, very good ride from Maserati, and we had Hermann Lang in the mix because yeah, he was a substitute driver for Maserati, and I couldn't actually find his photo from 1953, but I did find this one. This is Hermann Lang. If you remember when we talked about colors, we also had Hermann Lang driving. So this is obviously Mercedes car that you see. That's the the silver car, the silver Mercedes car. And this is kind of a showcase a drive from him in Nürburgring in 1986 that you see on your screens. But yeah, so he was actually competing in 1953. Really legendary person. Lived a very long life and, really cool guy.
Yeah, you're right. And with this, we come already to the final in Monza. And also, again, here we had a great racing. We had a great battle between Ascari, Farina, Fancho, and also Marimon. So 5 drivers really close together. Ascari, who normally drove perfectly, here made a mistake and spun. Farina had to get out of the way, and this opened the way for the only Maserati victory of that season. As
For Fangio.
Von Fangio, he took the opportunity and won the last race of the season. I'm not quite sure as which car Ascari used in the final race, and we will see this later. Ferrari introduced already the car for the next season at the last race, so maybe he wasn't.
It was a combination. Yeah. But also it probably was a combination of not only of the the new car, like him getting used to the new car, but also I think he knew kind of that he has nothing to worry about at that stage. Yes. So you could be more risk. I mean, like we said before, when we talked about Ascari was the kind of guy that was very very precise, so very careful about his decision making. And this was an opportunity to actually experiment. So he probably just took that opportunity to experiment as much as he could, and that didn't work out for him.
Yeah, or maybe it was the opposite, as he was a little bit more, he was not taking more risks, but more relaxed. Much later, we saw this with Nigel Mansell, who practically already won the Grand Prix, and so for this was driving slower the last lap, and as he was not driving on the limit, I mean, he went out of his rhythm and spun and lost the race.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, moving on to technology. Again, very interesting. So I think the cool thing about this the cars that we will start to see from 1953, and they do look a little bit like vacuum cleaners.
Right.
And yeah, again, I think another point is that they do start to look quite similar to each other. Like we had in 1952, where it was all sorts of stuff, like from really shiny Ferraris to like really crazy Coopers that look like someone just built them in the garage. Yeah, so here we actually see that teams have sort of managed to get some budgets, and the cars were more or less following similar structure.
Exactly, and in opposite, I think to today, in the 1950s and later, it was still possible that private teams could bought complete race cars. So we had from Ferrari, for example, the official Ferrari team, but also 2 or 3 private teams. And here on the left, we see the Swiss Ferrari team. And quite what we discussed with the different colors, we see the red, but we see a white stripe, which symbolizes the Swiss flag. And of course, we have some really cool augmented reality, so that I can show you this in 3D, how it would look. So wow. This is how you could distinguish the private Ferrari from the official Scuderia Ferrari team.
Yeah, and also I think the color is slightly different, right, from the previous.
To be honest, it looks like the same. Yeah.
Because but it still is quite a lot darker than in later years, right?
Yeah, right. It is darker than today, but in 53, I think it was the same red as also Ferrari had. They just put maybe on top this white stripe to distinguish the car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is Ferrari 500. And this is the new car, right? That was driven by Ascari in the last race. Is that?
I would assume that he also drove it because he was the number one driver. Honestly, I'm not quite sure if it was also him or maybe just one of his colleagues. As we discussed, 53 was still used with the Formula 2 regulations. So Ferrari developed this new car, the 553, which could be used under Formula 2 regulations, but also the next year under the Formula 1 regulations, because in 54 we already saw Formula 1 under the real Formula 1 regulations. So we are going back to the normal. And this 53 maybe had not been Ferrari's most successful car, as we see in the next episode. But nevertheless, it was quite aesthetic new development, and I can hold it also here in the car so that we can see it from the different sides. So it was clearly an evolution to the 500, and as we discussed in the earlier episode, it still looks very aesthetic in opposite to the smaller upcoming British teams.
Exactly. Yeah, Maserati A6 GCM. We have already seen this car. I just wanted to mention here that I did promise to find my photo with Nino Farina's car, which I couldn't find for some reason, but I know I have it and the reason I know I have it because I did find my photo with Maserati 550F, sorry, that Maserati produced in 1954. So we're going to discuss it next time when we talk about 1954. And that was the car that both Fangio and Stirling Moss drove at one point. And so I did find my picture with that car. So there should be a picture with Nino Farina's car. So at some point I will find it, I'm sure, but I just couldn't find it for some reason. But yeah, I just want to say that this is again the last year when we see the A6 GCM, which we have seen in previous years from Maserati, and then Maserati will go to 250F. Which is an amazing piece of engineering, and I'm going to next time I will show you some pictures from Coventry Transport Museum that I took of that car, and yeah, it's absolutely amazing, and you will understand why it was so good in races when you see that car. Yeah.
And interesting, it's practically the same car which they drove in the last season, but nevertheless they must have found a lot of stuff to advance, because in opposite to the 52 season, they really have been very near to Ferrari. So which clearly shows that it must have been development directly on the car, but also the drivers which joined Ferrari that year must really have brought a step forward for the team.
Yeah. I think, this is exactly kind of our conversation about drivers being very important, and the sensors and as the sensors and analytics kind of engines, and the driving force of this whole operation, like you were saying, Patrick. And indeed, I just think that they found the driver, so they found Fangio, and all of a sudden it started to work for them, because they needed the experience, right? So Fangio was already a very experienced person in this, and I think his experience in racing was really invaluable for the team, and they all of a sudden became really competitive.
Exactly.
Yeah, Cooper Bristol T23.
Yeah.
As you can see, so if you remember the car that we showed you from the previous year, that this is a huge improvement because the previous piece looked very unpolished and kind of like raw compared to the competitors. I mean, this one was already quite. Looked like Formula 2 car anyway, Formula 1 car from 1950s. And again, the important point here, I guess, is that throughout the years, we will see the rise of British engineering throughout this whole process. And definitely Cooper Bristol was the pioneer of this in terms of in terms of kind of paving the way for other teams, like later we will see Brabham and BMR and Lotus and others. Yeah.
Agreed on this. And with this, we're coming to the Kurtiskraft Offenhauser. So the car which won the Indianapolis 500 that year. I mean, it looked,
Volkovich drove that, and exactly. I was surprised how much difference you see from 1952. Right. Because we saw the Kurtiskraft Offenhauser in a photo from 1952. That was car number 98, if you remember from the latest episode, and you can see already how much that is different. So I guess that also kind of highlights the American engineering and how fast it was developing. Whereas like in European racing, it was more kind of traditional, smooth transition from one design to another. I mean, this is completely looks completely different from 1952, at least on the outside. And
exactly.
The dynamics, right? The dynamics of American market versus European market, you can already observe the difference by just looking at this.
Exactly, and you see also the difference as the IndyCar series, including the Indianapolis 500, was practically a national event. The cars, of course, had different colors, so they're not used in national colors for the US, but colors depending their sponsors, because in opposite to Formula One here in the US, the home of capitalism, we see, of course, the different stickers, logos from the sponsors on the car. And I mean, besides this, I think it's a very, also a very aesthetic design. So it was not only successful, but I mean, the car really looks good. Reminds me a little bit to Art Nouveau, the whole design. So it really fits if you see, let's say, famous architecture from that time, like the Empire State Building. So somehow you see the same philosophy in industrial design at that time in the US.
Yeah, I think it also could be that, when you think about it, like Indianapolis 500 was really one of the main events of the year, right? And you also could race that circuit in other events. So I think you could have a lot more practice compared to European teams who had to kind of deal with multiple circuits, and just to drive you need to drive the cars to each circuit, unless this is your home circuit, of course. But it's the operation is quite different, I think. So I think you have a lot more constraints, and anything can happen by just trying to transport the car to the race, and then you need to do some training there. And I think in probably one of the reasons why we see kind of big changes in American engineering here, and kind of relatively slow change, at least in terms of kind of makes from year to year in European, is that just European teams had to deal with a lot more variety and heterogeneity in racing tracks and conditions and all this.
Exactly, and I mean the whole IndyCar series. Most of the races are ovals, similar to Indianapolis, so they're not real racetracks. So the whole design of the car was made for oval racing. And for example, one obvious what you can see. This car has already steel wheels. I think it was steel at that time. I go shortly back. You still have this old-fashioned design for the race wheels, the European cars.
Yeah, nevertheless, in Indianapolis 500, like we mentioned before, was one of the most dangerous races. Yes. And I think in 1953, I mentioned the stats before last time, so forgive me if I don't get the numbers quite right. I think there were like 33 drivers starting this race, and only half of them finished the race. So it's it is a dangerous track. Don't get us wrong, but yeah, I mean, in terms of training, in terms of getting used to it, you have a lot more homogeneity in the United States compared to Europe.
That's true. And with this, we're coming to the people, and to be exactly to the drivers. Interesting if you see the top three. No surprising, no new faces. We saw all of them before. All of them won a championship. So it was only the question who would have his second championship, and it was Alberto Ascari. And we see as on the second position Juan Manuel Fangio as the first of the Maserati drivers. So Maserati was really close and made life for Ferrari quite difficult.
Exactly. And then, we again have Nino Farina and quite a few interesting Ferrari drivers that season. And I think at the next, slide, we see Mike Horton, who we showed you before. Yeah, I couldn't actually find a very nice photo for Bill Vukovich, but this is kind of, at least you can see what he looked like approximately. So this is the guy who actually won Indianapolis 500 in Curtis Kraft and Hauser car. And then we also have Tolo the Grafenried, and I just wanted to emphasize Mike Horton. Not only he was British, which was kind of quite unusual, but also he's very young compared to the rest of these guys. I mean, he's 10 years younger than everyone else that we see here.
Exactly.
Anyway.
And
Luigi Villarese. So that's Ascari's friend that we discussed last time. And you have already seen Gonzalez before, who was another Argentinian driver. And Felice Bonetto, that's another Maserati driver who is there. And you can see again the age, like pay attention to the age.
Yeah.
50 was not an excuse to stop back then. Being 50 was quite quite common, I guess, to race at that age. But a lot of them are kind of over 30, and close to 50, some of them.
Yes, and one difference, if you remember the 52 season, this year we only see Ferrari and Maserati drivers in the top 9 position if we take out the US winners. So in the last year, we saw the rise and positive results of the British team behind Ferrari, but now it became completely Italian again. And the reason for this was that Maserati really had been this year much stronger than in 52.
Yeah, exactly. And they have, and as you noticed, they have two Argentinian drivers driving for them as well. So yeah, kind of providing some heterogeneity. And I think it was probably one of the best decisions they made to engage Fangio and Gonzalez. In fact, yeah. So that was a very good decision for the team.
Yep. Is this we're coming to
behavior? Yeah. So from notable characters again, I want to mention Mike Thornton. I think he was very unusual character for this bunch. Much younger guy, and to me, I mean, I'm sure Patrick will have his own, or maybe he will not agree with me. But again, the notable win, I think that's another reason why I want to mention Mike, is because he won the French Grand Prix, which was, I think, absolutely extraordinary for a person his age. And what an extraordinary race that was. There is some footage you can find in kind of various archives. So do have a look, at least at highlights of the race. It's really fascinating to watch. Yeah, like I said, to me, like notable accidents didn't actually happen during the races, but like I mentioned before, there were 2 fatalities, and of course, we already mentioned the tragic event during the Argentinian race. That was quite important. Yeah, in terms of strategy, I think what we see this year that is quite different from the previous years is that we do not, we stopped kind of seeing huge heterogeneity in the work on the car. Of course, you know, budgets were different. We appreciate that, but you really see now kind of professional teams working on cars and, you know, engaging drivers, and so it more looks like an organized sport now. Of course, it was nothing like the teams we see today. Don't get me wrong. It still was kind of like a handful of people working on things, but I think that this is probably the year when we can say, okay, this is the start of the structured Formula One teams, rather than, you know, having pretty much anybody who can make a car, you know, compete, right? So you needed some organizational structure. You needed people who take responsibility for the engineering, and then you have people who take responsibility for driving. Of course, they need to communicate, but I think the structures actually emerged in 1953. And then we can, as we see the sport develop, you know, this kind of have grown now to really very specialized roles within teams. But yeah, I think this was one of so this was really a starting year for you know, yeah, professional sport. We can say it became really professional sport at this stage.
Yeah, in general, I agree with you. Just with a notable win, and maybe less because of the race, but because of the result. I would say the last one, Monza, because Maserati was the whole season very strong, but finally on the last race, they was able, thanks to Fangio, to win really the race. And I mean, it was not only the last race of the 53 season, but also it was somehow a sign what we should see in the 54 season.
One of my colleagues at the University of Warwick actually works on luck and skill. And basically the synthesis of kind of his work and his co-author's work is so his name is Cheng-Wei Liu, and he basically the synthesis of his work is that most of the time you have to be lucky, not only skillful but very lucky to succeed. And I think this Fanjo's win at the end of the season actually kind of showcases that the stars have to align for you, that finally he got his lucky moment. Because Ascari all of a sudden had this kind of incident, and he couldn't really so he couldn't win the race. So and then Fanjo took this opportunity. So you not only need the skill, but you also need luck. And this is the case when these two things coincided for Fanjo.
Exactly, but I mean, it's not that you need the luck, but when you finally had the luck after trying so much, you see often that then the luck stays with you, maybe because you lose a little bit the inner pressure, and before this you may be doing little faults due to the pressure you have, but when you had the luck, you can perceive yourself that you are able to win, and with this you are more confident, and this helps you in the further development of the car. You are more and sure about yourself in this driving. So when you have this moment that finally everything went together, this can be the beginning of a series, and really this helps not only the motivation, but also maybe reduce some of the little errors you're doing based on the stress you have.
Yeah, I will make some references to Cheng-Wei's work underneath this video. But the thing is, I think the important thing about his work is that indeed, so skill helps you create situations in which you can be lucky. So it increases the probability of luck, if you will. But yeah, still like you. We will, when we talk about especially some of the McLaren drivers, I will kind of put in some personal theory that some of them had very unlucky runs, I would say. And some drivers, again, this is from insight I had from people I know in Formula One. So some drivers just constantly, it's just like, whenever this person drives, like there will be definitely something wrong with the car, and there will be something different every time. So we will talk about these people. So do stay with us. I will talk about them in one of the kind of later episodes when we kind of get to further years in Formula One. So this kind of combination of luck and skill is important.
Exactly, and I mean, as in Formula One, we see machines, processes, and people quite on the limit. I mean, what we see here, the same effect you may also perceive in your personal life or in your personal job. Sometimes you may always be struggling with what is your task, but when you once brought it together, even if it was per luck, then you feel a higher self-esteem, and you keep the luck at least for a while.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, the legacy, like I said, for me in 1953 season is the rise of the professional racing as a professional, Formula One racing as a professional sport. So I think this to me, this is the starting point. And if previously we had, in principle, if you were an amateur, you could still kind of at least have your try in the sport with certain resources. So I think from 1953 onwards, it became quite difficult. So you actually needed some infrastructure behind you, and a budget, a team, however small the team is, to compete.
Exactly, and you see another thing that we really saw competition that year, and you see the push from competition to technical development. So as you said, we see professionalism not only of the organization, but we saw that Ferrari already developed a new car And the years before, we saw that they practically for 3-5 years drove with the same Formula One car. So it was not like today, where we see every season a complete new car designed by the teams.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this was 1953 season. I hope you enjoyed it, and please do leave your comments and tell us whether you agree with us or disagree with us, or if there's something we've missed. Yeah, and tell us what you think about 1953. So thanks a lot. Thanks for being with us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.